The wind was cold against my face as my sister pushed my wheelchair toward the edge of the hill. I should have felt safe. She was my family, my blood. But when she leaned down and whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my skin, the words that came out froze me to the bone. Everything is mine now. Before I could react, I felt her hands shove hard against the handles. The wheelchair lurched forward, the world tilted, and in that horrifying moment I realized the brakes weren't working. She had sabotaged them. My own sister wanted me dead. The gravel crunched beneath the spinning wheels. The ravine below grew closer. My scream tore through the empty park, but there was no one to hear me, or so she thought. What Melissa didn't know was that someone had been watching us from behind the trees. Someone who had already dialed 911. Someone who knew exactly what she had done. And that single phone call was about to destroy everything she had planned. Have you ever been betrayed by the one person you thought would never hurt you? My name is Amber Richardson. I'm 35 years old, and for the past decade I worked as a quality control supervisor at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. 5 years ago, a machine malfunction crushed my spine and changed my life forever. I thought that was the worst thing that would ever happen to me. I was wrong. Let me take you back to where it all started 1 month before my sister tried to kill me. I had just come home after follow-up spinal surgery. The original injury had never fully healed, and my doctors recommended a corrective procedure to address the ongoing damage. Recovery meant 6 weeks in a wheelchair and the humiliating necessity of returning to my parents' house for care. From the moment I rolled through that front door, I knew I wasn't welcome. My mother barely looked up from her magazine. My father muttered something about the guest room being ready, then disappeared into his study. And Melissa, my younger sister, the golden child, stood in the hallway with her arms crossed and a smirk on her face. 5 years later, and you're still playing the victim card, she said. Must be nice to have an excuse to avoid responsibility. I didn't respond. I had learned long ago that arguing with Melissa was pointless. In this family, she could do no wrong, and I could do no right. That first dinner confirmed everything I already knew. As I sat at the table, I noticed a large framed photo on the wall, my parents beaming proudly beside Melissa at her college graduation. I scanned the room for any evidence of my own accomplishments. There was nothing. Not my degree, not my promotion, not even a snapshot from when I bought my first apartment on my own. The only person who had ever celebrated my achievements was grandmother Eleanor, and she had passed away 2 years ago. When I casually mentioned that I was considering revisiting my workplace accident case, that new evidence might exist. My father's reaction stunned me. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and left the table without a word. Your father doesn't like talking about unpleasant things, my mother said, as if that explained everything. But later that night, I saw him in the garage speaking urgently into his phone. His voice was low, but I caught fragments through the cracked window. She can't start asking questions now. I handled it years ago. Something cold settled in my stomach. I didn't understand what he meant, but every instinct told me something was deeply wrong. The next morning, I noticed my wheelchair brakes were making a strange grinding sound. When I mentioned it to Melissa, she rolled her eyes. You're just using it wrong, she said dismissively. That night, a soft knock on my window startled me. It was Mr. Baum. Harris, the elderly neighbor who lived next door. His face was pale in the moonlight, and his eyes held an expression I couldn't quite read, something between guilt and recognition. I saw someone near your wheelchair in the garage, he whispered. Be careful. Before I could ask what he meant, he vanished into the darkness. The following evening, I overheard Melissa on a frantic phone call. I need the money before the end of the month, or I lose everything, she hissed. Later, I caught her rummaging through grandmother Eleanor's belongings in the attic. When I confronted her, she snapped with a bitterness that shocked me. Grandma always kept her best things for you anyway. Even dead, she's still playing favorites. The venom in her voice revealed something I had always sensed, but never fully understood, a jealousy that ran deeper than I ever imagined. That night, while sorting through grandmother's things myself, I found a sealed envelope labeled in her handwriting, "For Amber, to be opened on your 35th birthday." Inside was a living trust document. Grandmother Eleanor had left me the family home, but the trust would only activate when I turned 35. My birthday was in 3 weeks, and now I understood exactly why Melissa was so desperate. The discovery of grandmother Eleanor's trust changed everything. For 2 weeks, I watched Melissa with new eyes, noticing every glance, every whisper, every moment she thought I wasn't paying attention. And what I saw terrified me. Her hostility wasn't just sibling rivalry anymore. It was something darker, something desperate, something that made me lock my bedroom door at night. One evening at dinner, Melissa finally dropped all pretense of civility. She set down her fork and stared at me with open contempt. "You know what I think," she announced loudly enough for both our parents to hear. "I think you've been faking this disability for 5 years, milking it for sympathy, using it as an excuse to mooch off everyone who feels sorry for you." I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me. He said nothing. He didn't even look up from his plate. My mother kept her eyes fixed on her food, pretending she hadn't heard a word. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, Melissa leaned close to me. Her breath was warm against my ear, and her voice dropped to a whisper meant only for me. "If you disappeared, this family would finally breathe again, and Grandma's precious house would go to people who actually deserve it." I sat frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She pulled back with a pleasant smile, as if she had just complimented my haircut. No one else at the table reacted. Either they hadn't heard, or they didn't care. Later that night, I passed by my mother's bedroom and heard her on the phone with someone. "Melissa's just stressed about money," she was saying. "She doesn't mean the things she says. You know how sisters are." I stood in the hallway stunned. My mother had heard the threat. She had heard her daughter wish me gone, and she had chosen to dismiss it as stress. The next morning, I decided to get some fresh air in the backyard. The sun was warm, and I thought a few minutes outside might clear my head. I wheeled myself onto the back porch and down the wooden ramp my father had reluctantly installed. The yard sloped gently downward toward a concrete drainage ditch at the far end of the property. I had barely reached the middle of the lawn when my wheelchair suddenly lurched forward. I grabbed for the wheels, trying to slow myself down, but the brakes weren't responding. The chair picked up speed, racing down the slope toward the concrete ditch. I could see it approaching, could imagine my skull cracking against that hard gray surface. In pure desperation, I threw my arm out and caught the edge of a wooden railing that bordered my mother's garden. The impact nearly dislocated my shoulder, but I held on. The wheelchair jerked to a stop inches from disaster. I sat there gasping, my entire body shaking. Within seconds, my family came rushing out of the house. My father examined the wheelchair with a frown. "The ground was wet," he announced matter-of-factly. "You need to be more careful, Amber. You can't just go racing around on slopes like this." I wanted to scream at him. The ground wasn't wet. The brakes had failed. But before I could say anything, I looked at Melissa. She was standing behind our parents, her face arranged in an expression of concern. But I caught it, just for a second, before she masked it. Disappointment. Raw, undisguised disappointment that I was still alive. That afternoon, while everyone else was busy, I called my former colleague Daniel, who had worked in maintenance at the manufacturing plant. He had always been kind to me, and I knew I could trust him. I asked him to come by and look at my wheelchair without telling anyone. He arrived that evening and spent 20 minutes examining the brakes. When he looked up, his face was pale. "Amber, these brakes were deliberately loosened," he said quietly. "This wasn't wear and tear. Someone did this on purpose. Someone wants you dead." I thanked him and asked him to keep this between us. After he left, I sat alone in my room trying to process what I already knew, but hadn't wanted to believe. My own sister was trying to kill me. I knew I needed evidence. Without proof, no one would believe me. This family had spent 35 years dismissing everything I said. I drove to an electronics store and purchased small recording devices, the kind that could be hidden easily and activated remotely. I installed one in my bedroom tucked behind a stack of books. Another went in the garage, concealed among my father's tools. If anyone was going to plot against me, I would capture every word. While searching for a good hiding spot in the garage, I stumbled upon something unexpected. In my father's desk drawer, buried under old receipts and paperwork, I found an envelope from an insurance company. It was related to my workplace accident from 5 years ago, but my father's name was prominently featured on several documents inside. I didn't understand what it meant, but I photographed everything with my phone. Whatever my father was hiding, I intended to find out. The next day, Mr. Harris approached me while I was sitting on the front porch. He glanced around nervously before speaking. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. "It's important." I agreed, and he led me slowly through his garden, away from any windows where we might be observed. What he told me shook me to my core. I worked at the same company as your father, he said. 20 years side by side. I know what really happened with your accident, Amber, and I know why your father has been acting strange ever since you came back. I stared at him, my mind racing. Why didn't you tell me before? I demanded. You've lived next door for 2 years. He sighed heavily, and I could see the weight of guilt in his eyes. I had no proof, he admitted. Just my word against your father's. I wasn't sure you'd believe a stranger over your own family, but when I saw you come back in that wheelchair after your surgery, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I've been waiting for you to be ready to hear the truth. He paused and looked directly into my eyes. The danger isn't just from your sister, he warned. Trust no one in that house, not your mother, not your father, no one. I wanted to ask more questions, but he shook his head. Not yet, he said. When you're ready, when you have more pieces of the puzzle, come back to me. I'll tell you everything. That night, I checked the recording device I had hidden in the garage. My hands trembled as I plugged in my earphones and pressed play. At first, there was nothing but silence and the occasional creak of the house settling. Then I heard footsteps, and then Melissa's voice, clear as day, speaking into what sounded like a voice memo on her phone. Brakes are done, she said coldly. She won't survive the hill. I have to finish this before her birthday, before she takes everything Grandma meant for me. There was a pause, and then she added almost to herself, There's no other choice. I sat in the darkness, the recording playing over and over in my ears. My sister had just confessed to planning my murder, and she intended to finish what she started before I turned 35. I played that recording at least a dozen times that night, each listen confirming what I desperately wished wasn't true. My sister was planning to murder me. She had already tried once in the backyard, and now she was preparing for a second attempt. Something about a hill, something that would happen before my birthday. I had 3 days left, 3 days to decide whether to run to hide or to fight back. I chose to fight. I understood something fundamental about my situation. I had spent 35 years being dismissed by this family. Every concern I raised was minimized. Every accusation I made was turned against me. If I went to the police with an audio recording, Melissa would claim it was taken out of context. My parents would vouch for her. They would say I was paranoid, bitter, jealous of my sister's place in the family. Without undeniable proof, no one would believe me. They never had before, so I made a decision that terrified me, but felt absolutely necessary. I would let Melissa make her move, but this time I would control the circumstances. This time I would be ready. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I contacted Mr. Harris and explained my plan. He was reluctant at first, worried about the danger, but ultimately agreed to help. I gave him my phone number and clear instructions. I'm going to share my GPS location with you. I told him, if I text you the word now, call 911 immediately. Don't wait. Don't second guess. Just call. He nodded solemnly and promised he would be watching. I also tested my phone's video recording capability. I needed to capture everything clearly, even from inside my jacket pocket. I practiced positioning it so the camera lens would face outward, recording whatever was in front of me. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. It would have to be. On the 3rd day before my birthday, Melissa approached me with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. Amber, I've been terrible to you lately, she said. I know things have been tense between us. I was thinking maybe we could go for a walk in the park, just the two of us, like we used to when we were kids. What do you say? Every instinct in my body screamed danger. This was it. This was the moment she had been planning. But I kept my face calm and nodded. That sounds nice, I replied. I'd like that. As we prepared to leave, I noticed my father standing at the living room window. He was watching us, but his expression wasn't one of concern. It was something else entirely. Anticipation. Like he was waiting for something to happen. Something he already knew about. Melissa pushed my wheelchair down the familiar streets toward Riverside Park. She chatted pleasantly about nothing in particular, commenting on the weather, asking about my physical therapy. To anyone watching, we looked like two sisters enjoying a peaceful afternoon together, but I knew better. When we entered the park, Melissa steered us away from the main paths, away from the joggers and dog walkers, toward a secluded section I had never visited before. The trail wound upward through dense trees until we reached the top of a steep hill. Below us, the path dropped sharply toward a rocky ravine. There were no security cameras here, no other people, no witnesses. If a woman in a wheelchair happened to lose control and tumble down this slope, it would look like a tragic accident. Nothing more. Melissa stopped pushing. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice changed completely, dropping the false sweetness like a mask she no longer needed. "You know, Grandma always loved you more," she said bitterly. "I was the one who visited her every week. I was the one who sat by her bed and held her hand when she was dying. But you were always her favorite. You barely showed up, and she still loved you more." I could hear years of resentment pouring out of her decades of jealousy she had hidden beneath her perfect golden child exterior. "And now she's giving you everything from beyond the grave," Melissa continued. Her hands gripped the wheelchair handles so tightly her knuckles turned white. "The house, the trust, everything that should have been mine. But you won't get it, Amber. You won't get anything." Before I could respond, she shoved the wheelchair with all her strength. The world tilted violently. I felt myself hurtling forward, the wheels spinning uselessly beneath me as gravity took over. The rocky ravine rushed toward me with terrifying speed. Wind roared in my ears. I saw death approaching and understood this was how my sister wanted me to end. But fate had other plans. The wheelchair veered slightly to the right, catching the edge of a thick bush that lined the path. The branches tore at my clothes and skin, but they slowed my descent dramatically. The chair tipped sideways, and I was thrown onto a patch of grass, rolling several feet before coming to a stop. I lay there, gasping, my body screaming with pain but alive, bruised and shaken but alive. From somewhere above me, I heard shouting. Mr. Harris emerged from the tree line, moving faster than I would have thought possible for a man his age. "I saw everything," he yelled. "I saw what you did." Melissa's reaction was instantaneous. She rushed down the slope toward me, her face rearranging itself into an expression of horror and concern. "Oh my God, Amber, are you okay?" she cried. "The chair just slipped. I tried to hold on, but it just slipped." She reached for me, probably planning to play the devoted sister until help arrived. But I was ready. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket and held it up so she could see the screen. The video was still recording. "I got everything," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "Every word you said, every push. It's all right here." The color drained from Melissa's face. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she had no excuse, no manipulation, no way to twist the narrative in her favor. Mr. Harris had already called 911 the moment he saw Melissa push me. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the quiet park. I showed the officers my video, and they watched in grim silence as my sister confessed her jealousy, her hatred, and then attempted to murder me. They handcuffed Melissa while she stood frozen in disbelief. But as they led her toward the patrol car, something inside her snapped. The composure she had maintained her entire life shattered completely. She started screaming, tears streaming down her face. "This isn't fair. Why am I the only one being arrested? Dad knew. He knew everything, he said. If she was gone, everything would work out. He promised he would help me contest the trust. He said he had lawyers who could make problems disappear. Ask him, ask him." I felt the world tilt again. But this time it wasn't physical. It was everything I thought I knew crumbling around me. My father knew. He had encouraged this. He had promised to help Melissa if I was gone. The insurance envelope I had found in his desk. Mr. Harris's warning that the danger wasn't just from my sister, the way he had left the table when I mentioned investigating my accident, the phone call I had overheard about handling things years ago, everything connected in one devastating moment of clarity. My father hadn't just ignored Melissa's murder plot, he had been part of it, and if he was willing to let his own daughter die, now what had he been willing to do 5 years ago? The accident that had crushed my spine and stolen years of my life. Had that been an accident at all? That question haunted me for weeks. Had my accident been an accident at all? The police investigation that followed Melissa's arrest would answer that question in ways I never could have anticipated. What I learned in those 3 weeks shattered whatever remained of my belief in family and blood, in the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, but it also set me free. Melissa broke within days of her arrest. The golden child who had manipulated our family for 31 years crumbled under the weight of interrogation. She confessed everything, and the detectives shared the details with me as the victim of her crime. Her financial situation was far worse than I had imagined. She owed over $200,000 from failed cryptocurrency investments. She had poured her savings, her retirement, even money she didn't have, into schemes that promised quick returns and delivered only ruin. Bankruptcy was imminent. Foreclosure on her condo was weeks away. She was drowning, and she saw only one way out. While desperately searching through Grandmother Eleanor's belongings for valuables, she could sell Melissa had discovered the living trust. She learned that our grandmother had left the family home solely to me, but with one crucial condition. The trust would only activate when I turned 35. If I died before that birthday, the trust would become void. The house would then pass to the entire family through standard inheritance laws. Melissa could force a sale and claim her share. That money would save her from financial ruin. All it required was my death. But there was more. Melissa revealed something that made my blood run cold. She told investigators that she had confided in our father about her desperation. She had told him she wished I would just disappear, and instead of stopping her, instead of protecting his eldest daughter, my father had encouraged her. He said if she was gone, he could help me contest the trust, Melissa told the detectives. He said he knew lawyers who could make problems disappear. He even researched ways to have Amber declared mentally incapacitated, so the trust would be voided without anyone having to do anything drastic. My own father had been planning to destroy me legally if Melissa's murder attempt failed. He had contingency plans. He had been thinking about this for weeks, maybe longer. Then Mr. Harris came forward with his testimony, and the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place with devastating clarity. He provided sworn statements and documents he had kept hidden for 5 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. What he told investigators explained everything. My father, Richard Richardson, had been the safety compliance manager at Hartwell Manufacturing. 5 years ago, he had discovered serious violations in the assembly line where I worked. Faulty equipment, inadequate safety guards, problems that would cost millions of dollars to repair. Instead of reporting these violations as his job required, my father signed falsified inspection reports. He certified that everything was safe when he knew it wasn't. He did this to protect his position, his reputation, and his annual bonus. 3 months after he signed those false reports, the exact equipment he had certified as safe malfunctioned. I was standing at my station when the machine collapsed. It crushed my spine and changed my life forever. But my father's betrayal didn't end there. While I lay sedated in the hospital recovering from emergency surgery, my father negotiated secretly with Hartwell Manufacturing. He forged my signature on documents that waived all liability claims against the company. He signed away my right to sue, my right to compensation, my right to justice. In exchange, the company gave him early retirement with full benefits and a severance package of $150,000. My father had sold my future for money. I had a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against that company. I could have held them accountable. I could have received compensation that would have covered my medical bills, my lost wages, my pain and suffering. But I never knew any of this because my own father stole it from me to protect himself. The investigators told me that because my father had committed fraud by forging my signature and hiding the truth, the statute of limitations on my lawsuit had been paused. I still had the right to sue Hartwell Manufacturing. The case my father tried to bury could finally see the light of day, but knowing I could pursue legal action didn't ease the pain of what I had learned. My father had crippled me through his negligence, then profited from my suffering while ensuring I would never know the truth. A week after these revelations, my mother came to see me. She appeared at my apartment door with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, begging to be let in. Against my better judgment, I allowed her to enter. She sat across from me and immediately began sobbing, pleading for forgiveness, insisting she had never meant for any of this to happen. I let her cry. I let her beg. And then I asked the only question that mattered. What did you know? She couldn't meet my eyes as she answered. She admitted that 1 week before Melissa pushed me down that hill, she had overheard my sister on the phone. She heard Melissa say clearly, "I wish she would just disappear permanently." My mother had heard those words. She had heard her youngest daughter express a desire for my death, and she had done nothing. She assumed it was just venting. She told herself Melissa didn't really mean it. She chose to believe the comfortable lie rather than confront the terrifying truth. She also confessed that she knew my father had handled something related to my workplace accident. She never asked what that meant. She never wanted to know the details. Ignorance was easier than accountability. I looked at this woman who had given birth to me, who had raised me, who was supposed to protect me above all else, and I spoke the truth she needed to hear. "You chose your comfort over my life," I said quietly. "You heard your daughter threaten murder and decided it was easier to pretend you didn't. You knew your husband was hiding something about my accident and chose not to ask questions. I almost died because of your silence." My mother collapsed into sobs, finally confronting the cost of 35 years of willful blindness. I felt no satisfaction in her tears, only exhaustion, only grief for the mother I had never really had. There was one final revelation that emerged from the investigation, and it broke something inside me in an entirely different way. While examining financial records related to Melissa's debt, police discovered that 8 years ago, when Melissa was just starting her career, I had co-signed a $30,000 car loan for her. She had defaulted on payments multiple times over the years, but the loan had never gone to collections. Her credit score had remained intact. Bank records showed why. I had set up automatic payments from my own account. For 8 years, I had been quietly paying my sister's debt without her knowledge. I did it because I loved her, because I wanted her to succeed, because despite everything I believed family meant protecting each other. Melissa never knew. She assumed the bank was being lenient with her, that she had somehow gotten lucky. When investigators informed her of this in jail, when they showed her the bank records proving that the sister she had tried to murder was the same person who had protected her credit for nearly a decade, she broke down completely. The woman who had pushed me toward death finally understood who I really was. I was not her enemy. I had never been her competition. I was the only person in our entire family who had ever truly sacrificed anything for her. The trial date was approaching. I held evidence that could send both my father and my sister to prison for years. The choice was mine: prosecute fully or show mercy, demand justice or offer forgiveness. I thought about everything they had done to me: the 35 years of being invisible, the accident my father caused, the lawsuit he stole, the murder my sister attempted, the silence my mother chose. What did justice look like for a family that was supposed to protect me, but instead conspired to destroy me? I chose justice. Complete and uncompromising justice. For 35 years, I had been invisible to my family, dismissed and diminished at every turn. But in that courtroom, I was finally seen. I was finally heard. And for the first time in my life, the people who had wronged me faced real consequences for their actions. The trials took 14 months to conclude. 14 months of testimonies, evidence reviews, legal proceedings, and emotional reckonings. But when the gavels finally fell, the verdicts delivered everything I had hoped for. Melissa Richardson, my sister, the golden child who had tried to push me to my death, received 12 years in federal prison for attempted murder. The prosecution had initially sought 20 years, but Melissa accepted a plea deal that reduced her sentence. Even with that reduction, she would serve at least 8 years before becoming eligible for parole. 8 years in a cell to contemplate the moment she shoved my wheelchair toward that ravine. 8 years to remember the sister who had secretly paid her debts while she plotted murder. My father's reckoning came next. Richard Richardson stood before a judge and heard the full weight of his crimes read aloud: conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery, obstruction of justice. The evidence was overwhelming. The falsified safety reports, the forged signature on my liability waiver, the secret severance payment he had accepted while I lay broken in a hospital bed. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison and $500,000 in fines. It wasn't enough. No sentence could undo what he had done to me. But watching him led away in handcuffs, watching the man who had sold his daughter's future finally face accountability, brought a closure I hadn't known I needed. The civil case against Hartwell Manufacturing concluded separately. Because my father had fraudulently forged my signature and concealed the existence of my lawsuit, the statute of limitations had been paused under what the lawyers called the discovery rule. The company remained legally liable for my injuries once I discovered the fraud. After months of negotiation, the court awarded me $2.1 million in damages. It was money I had earned through 5 years of pain surgeries and stolen opportunities, money my father had tried to take from me. Now it was mine. My mother faced no criminal charges. There was no law against willful blindness, no statute that punished a parent for choosing comfort over their child's safety. But she did not escape consequence entirely. I filed for a restraining order, and the court granted it. Patricia Richardson was legally prohibited from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my residence. She would spend the rest of her life knowing that her silence had nearly killed her daughter and that her daughter wanted nothing more to do with her. Some punishments don't require prison cells. The court also validated grandmother Eleanor's living trust. The house that Melissa had been willing to kill for the house my father had conspired to steal was officially and legally mine. Every document was reviewed, every challenge dismissed. My grandmother's final wish was honored. I had survived to see my 35th birthday, and everything she had left me was now in my hands. 14 months of physical therapy transformed my recovery in ways I hadn't dared to hope for. The doctors had always said that with consistent effort, I might regain more mobility than initially predicted. They were right. By the time the trials concluded, I could walk again. Not perfectly, not without assistance. But the wheelchair that had defined my life for so long was gone, replaced by a simple wooden cane. Every step I took felt like victory. Every moment on my own, 2 feet reminded me that my sister had failed. I was still here. I was still standing. I moved out of the cramped apartment I had rented during the legal proceedings and found a small place downtown. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom unit with large windows and good light. But it was mine. I paid for it with my own money. I decorated it according to my own taste. For the first time in 35 years, I was living entirely on my own terms. I also started a new career, one that gave meaning to everything I had endured. I became a safety compliance consultant, helping companies identify and correct the exact kinds of violations that had nearly cost me my life. My painful experience became my expertise. Every workplace I helped make safer was a small act of revenge against the negligence that had harmed me. Mr. Harris became my anchor through all of it. Every Sunday, without fail, we shared dinner together. Sometimes at my apartment, sometimes at his house, sometimes at a quiet restaurant where we could talk for hours. He had become the family I had always deserved. One evening, as we sat on his porch watching the sunset, he told me something that brought tears to my eyes. "I stayed silent 5 years ago," he said, his voice heavy with old regret. "I knew what your father had done, and I said nothing. It ate at me every single day. When I saw you come home in that wheelchair after your surgery, I knew I had been given a second chance. This time, I didn't stay silent. Thank you for letting me make it right." I reached over and squeezed his weathered hand. He had made mistakes, but he had also saved my life. That was worth more than a lifetime of apologies. The family house sat empty for months while I decided what to do with it. I could have sold it. The money would have been substantial. But every time I considered listing it, something held me back. This was the house where grandmother Eleanor had lived. The house where she had shown me the only unconditional love I had ever known from my family. Selling it felt like erasing her memory. So I chose a different path. I transformed the house into a shelter for elderly women escaping domestic abuse, family abandonment, or financial exploitation by relatives. Women like me, who had been betrayed by the people who should have protected them. I named it Eleanor's House. On the opening day, while preparing the main room for our first residence, I discovered something that stopped me in my tracks. Hidden inside grandmother Eleanor's favorite book, tucked between pages she must have known I would eventually read, was a second letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper and recognized her handwriting. "My dearest Amber," she had written, "if you're reading this, you've survived whatever storm that family created. I always knew you were the strongest of them all. I knew you would do something beautiful with this house, something that honors the love I couldn't give you openly while I was alive. I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you. Love forever. Grandma Eleanor." I pressed that letter to my heart and wept. Even from beyond the grave, she was still watching over me. Before the shelter opened, I wrote one final letter. Not to my mother, not to my father, to Melissa. I didn't write to reconcile or forgive. I wrote to close the door forever. You tried to take my life because you couldn't accept that Grandma loved me, I wrote. But here's what you never understood. Her love wasn't a competition. There was room for both of us. You just couldn't see it through your jealousy. I don't forgive you. Some things can't be forgiven, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I don't hate you either. Hatred would chain me to you forever, and I've already spent too many years living in your shadow. I choose freedom. I hope someday in that cell you find a way to live with what you've done. Not for my sake, for yours. This is goodbye. The first residents of Eleanor's house arrived on a warm Tuesday afternoon. 3 elderly women, each carrying small bags and uncertain expressions. One of them, a 68-year-old woman whose own daughter had stolen her life savings, took my hand and whispered through tears, "Thank you. I didn't know where else to go." I squeezed her hand gently and smiled. "You're safe now," I told her. "This is your home." As the sun set that evening, I stood on the porch of Eleanor's house and watched the golden light wash over the walls. Mr. Harris walked up beside me, 2 cups of tea in hand. "Eleanor would be so proud," he said quietly. I smiled, feeling tears prick my eyes. I know she would. Sometimes the family you're born into fails you completely. But if you're lucky, you get the chance to build a new one. I had survived my sister's betrayal, transformed my pain into purpose, and turned a house of broken memories into a sanctuary of healing. That was my victory. That was my story. Amber's story teaches us something important that many of us learn too late in life. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by the people who choose to stand beside you, protect you, and love you without conditions. Sometimes the people who share your last name are the ones who hurt you the most deeply. And sometimes a kind neighbor or a trusted friend becomes the family you truly deserve. If you recognize yourself in Amber's story, if you have ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most, please know this: you are not alone. Your feelings are valid, and you have the right to choose your own peace, even if that means walking away from those who refuse to see your worth. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. If it touched your heart or made you think, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story like this one. We would love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your thoughts with our community. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.